Hello, everybody. It's your boy Baron here. I am Baron Baptiste, and I'm here with David Masters. How you doing, David?
Fantastic, man. Coming back to life.
Yeah. You went through it. You didn't have COVID or something like that, right?
No, I didn't, but I got a whole series of things that hit me all at once, and man, I lost 20 some odd pounds, and over a period of a couple months, it's just it just wiped me out. But I'm coming back. I'm coming back.
Yeah, you're sounding and looking stronger.
Thank you.
That's good.
I feel better.
Yeah. Everybody, welcome to the show, Disrupting the Drift. Now's the time to wake up, and this is a place where we can tell the truth, and the truth can be told. Please send your questions to disruptingthedrift@baronbaptiste.com. Disruptingthedrift@baronbaptiste. And you be a part of this transformative journey with us, will y'all? Subscribe. If you're on the podcast, audio version, on YouTube, Disrupting the Drift with Baron Baptiste, Disrupting the Drift on YouTube. We updated the name of the channel. It was Baron Baptiste Podcast. Now it is Disrupting the Drift, man. Your support is our strength. Leave a 5-star review, leave comments in YouTube. You could also leave your questions in the comments on YouTube. We'll be posting these twice a week. We took a break over the holidays, but now we're getting into mid-January of 2024, right? That's where we're at now. But leave a 5-star review or hit the like button on YouTube. Your engagement is what propels the movement forward. It supports us and what we're up to. We want to hear from you, your questions, your stories, your breakthroughs. Send them in, leave them in the comments. When you engage with us, it's much better. We get to engage with you and have you be a part of what we're up to. David, we have an interesting article today. You shared this article with me just a little bit ago. I like it. I think what's happening in the world, it's the truth of what's happening in the world is division. Yeah. People are divided. Was it Abraham Lincoln that said people divided against themselves cannot stand?
That's also a biblical prophecy.
Is that where that sourced from? Yeah. I see. Interesting. It's true. If we're divided within ourselves as an individual, if I'm divided within myself, if I am in the experience of having lost myself, I'm in the head attacking myself, beating down on myself, tearing down on myself. That kind of division leaves you standing in quicksand. You take what's happening inwardly with people and you put that outward into the external environment, into people close to you, your family, your peers, people you work with, your community, society, humanity at large is divided. And we're on quicksand. So what is the way? What is the way to unify? What is the way to pull us within ourselves, the work, it's always self first. I like to call it self first, not selfish, self first. Do the inner work, awaken to the inner promptings of your being, of your conscience, connected to something greater than yourself, begins to unify yourself. And when you're unified within yourself, you are in your center. And from center, you don't get caught up in all the dynamics of division that are in the world. Should we get right into this article? Anything you want? Okay.
No, so it's great.
The article, who's this by?
It came from Study Finds, which is a website.
Okay, Study Finds.
Yeah.
It's called Love versus Politics. How news coverage triggers fights in divided couples. As U.S. politics continue to heat up ahead of the 2024 presidential election, researchers from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign are offering a peek into the struggles of American couples with opposing political viewpoints. American politics have been extremely polarizing for quite some time now. Republicans and Democrats, whether it be on Capitol Hill itself or on social media, appear incapable of civil interaction on a disturbingly frequent basis. Now, researchers say the biggest trigger for political fights between romantic partners is news media coverage.
Wow.
Dang. The good old days of just fighting over who's going to do the dishes or finances, or maybe all those things are happening and you throw this on top of it. Man, that's trouble at home.
This goes back, though, way back. And I want to specifically quote where this came from, the idea that a house divided cannot stand. This is Matthew 12:25. Mm-hmm. And here's what it says. But Jesus knew their thoughts and said to them, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself will not stand. Mm. So this is very clear. It goes back thousands of years that there's divisions throughout the course of history between people over, and specifically to me, moral issues. Because what is there to fight about if they aren't moral issues? If everybody's on the same moral page, there's nothing to fight about. We all agree that right is right and wrong is wrong. But now this is where it gets really interesting. And here's what John Adams said about it. Abuse of words has been the greatest instrument of sophistry and chicanery of party, faction, and division of society.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about is word
This is
abuse.
ancient. This is hardwired into humanity, into human beings.
Yes.
And if you're not operating off a common set of principles and values and morals, you don't have any, there's no structure. And essentially, trust is killed. If you're operating with, like I had to learn early on in life, if I was dealing with people who were unprincipled, didn't have some guiding principles, you couldn't trust them. You'd lend them money and then they'd say they'd pay you back, but they don't pay you back. They don't do what they say they'll do. Or you work with peers or employees or teams and with people in life, or a partner, a life partner, a husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend. If people aren't operating out of some kind of higher principles, objective principles that take it out of just the subjective realm, how are you going to unite? It's not possible. But I think we're also dealing in a world now where people aren't principled at the source of it. And then they buy into outer, exterior principles, narratives, and they're not thinking for themselves from their own principles and values. They're thinking from some kind of ideology or cult think, group think.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. The idea of what John Adams said about division, he said, abuse of words has been the greatest instrument of sophistry and chicanery of party, faction, and division of society. Look, a house divided against itself will fall, and a country divided against itself. It's the same principle on a massive scale. Mm-hmm. And so how do you create the divisions that cause people to have arguments over news stories? That's really interesting to me in and of itself, that a piece of information comes out, and then because of our way of understanding something, or because of our innate intuition or our personal upbringing, that we are in now a war with a person that we live with over an idea. But how long has this been going on? It's been going on for thousands of years, since the very beginning. And so the abuse of words in the media, to me, is the clear issue. And that abuse is injecting people with what I want to call lies and deception. Some people, when they believe a lie, then they defend a lie. And if they have no basis for understanding why something is true or not true, then they just accept whatever it is that's injected into them by whatever source they're taking that information from. And then that information becomes their Manchurian candidate handler. That the source of the news now becomes your handler, your smartphone, your TV, your news feed, your friends. They all reinforce this idea of something that they want you to believe for whatever reason. And look at it, though, it really does boil down to a moral issue for most people, and especially politics really has become the moral dividing line between whether or not you're going to let your kids become transitioned or whether you're going to allow illegal aliens to invade our country by the millions, or whether or not you're going to allow climate change to dominate the way we live. And these are really important issues. And at the same time, the truth about these issues is often obscured in all kinds of fuzzy logic and strange thinking. What do you think about that?
Yeah, what comes to mind is there's your truth, my truth, and then there's the truth. And I think that before politics, people have been addicted to being right. Being right for a human being is like heroin. Yeah. Actually, there's studies, I forget the actual chemical, or is it a hormone that's released from the brain? They've done studies that show that being right stimulates a part of the brain that releases, I forget the actual hormone it releases.
I think it's dopamine.
Is it may be dopamine?
It's that feel-good hormone.
Yeah, it's the same one that when people take heroin, it's that same chemistry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what happens is when you haven't dealt with your own need to be right. And now, again, I'm talking about not the objective right and wrong, talking about people have a self-righteousness that it's just about being right. That old saying that people would rather be dead right than alive and happy. Yeah. And even when you're wrong, you'll cling to being right because it's a way of being better than, smarter than, or you get to dismiss others or invalidate others. Those are highs. That's a false kind of power. It's power. Yeah. You could call it false power. And I don't know if it's false. I'd just say it's a dark power that people get very caught up in, and they're not aware of it. They don't know it, and they don't know that they don't know it. They're driven by just these unconscious forces to be right. And when you now don't have your own inner leadership, you're led from within, better said. When you're not led from within, you're now subject to outer leaders.
Yeah, you said it this way. Yeah. You said you are either informed or outformed.
Yeah, very good. Right? Yeah.
And you're formed from within, and the Bible says, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of the mind from within. So if you are being renewed from the source of knowing, which is consciousness itself, then you see things as they are, as opposed to what you've been trained to believe, maybe even hypnotized. And again, what are we fighting with each other over? Ideas. And what if one person says to another, climate change isn't really the problem? Yeah, there's climate change. It happens all the time. It's natural. It's the course of thousands of years. Over the course of thousands of years, the climate changes all the time. And right now, we're actually in a polar vortex, which is freezing a lot of the northern part of this country. But this is just natural.
And maybe human beings impact environment. Maybe. Yeah, it's all natural. But there's some other kind of forces at work that are using things. You saw this during the pandemic, like powers, people at higher levels in government, whether it's US government, global powers that are attempting to impose control and dominion over people and the way people live. And then they use things like climate change, or they use things like the pandemic to impose greater control. Suddenly, like in New York City, you're not allowed to, pizza makers can't use just good old fashioned wood burning ovens to make pizza, or they're taking away your ability to have just a gas burning stove,
and even air conditioners for the summer.
Yeah, it's
too much pollution, they say.
And it's just chipping away at people's individual choice and rights. And the government originally, the government was intended to be subject to the people and people's choice, and not in reverse. But we've now found ourselves in a position where there's outer authority. And let me make this one point.
Yeah.
Let me make this one point. It ties in what I was saying a little bit earlier, where if you're not seeing things for yourself, if you're not inwardly led and by an inner authority, let's say that inner knowing, different than knowingness, being the know-it-all. If you don't have that inner ability to see for yourself, you then look to outer leaders, the media, an outer authority, the groupthink on social media, the government. You're subject to outer leaders and experts. And when you give away your power in that way, you further divide yourself within yourself. And as you're divided within yourself, you will divide yourself from the people closest to you. And you become someone who tears down, not unifies. Only the truth can unify.
Well, see, and this is a great point. Everything you said was very profound. It almost obliterated the point I wanted to make because it was really good. But what I wanted to say is I believe that there is a great awakening happening. And I believe that at the core of what the news article that you read is that some people have reached that point of pain where the pain is awakening them to the potential of what can go wrong. In other words, there's two kinds of pain. There's pain that puts us to sleep, and there's pain that wakes us up. Now, here's a great quote from Francis Quarles. He says, "Scandal breeds hatred." This sounds like Yoda. Scandal breeds hatred. Hatred begets division.
Candle?
His name is
That's
Quarles.
a good imitation. You've got that dialed in.
Oh, the Yoda. Scandal breeds hatred. Hatred begets scandal. Mm-hmm. Hatred begets division. Division makes faction, and faction brings ruin.
Yeah.
But faction also brings pain when people are divided against each other. And
what is faction?
Faction is taken aside. You're on one side or the other. That's your faction. That's the part that you are identified with. I've heard recently from people within my own sphere, my own family, that there are issues that are causing quarrels and arguments that would otherwise not exist. Well, this is, I think, is an important turning point.
You mean politically or
just within the family over moral issues? That's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a potentially great moment. It's a reset moment. They talk about the Great Reset, but the Great Reset might go the opposite direction that they wanted it to go, where we don't all go, hey, yeah, let's have electric vehicles, because electric vehicles, you can't even charge them in Chicago. So electric vehicles aren't really the answer. They're part of the problem, depending upon where you are and how much access you have to coal-powered electricity. But
isn't there something with electrical vehicles? Is it the battery or something that?
Well, coal makes it harder to charge.
Yeah, and to source I'm blanking lithium. What it takes to unearth lithium is so damaging to the environment.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's horrifying.
Yeah,
it's
in the climate.
Horrifying.
Yeah. So it contradicts itself.
It actually does.
You know what? Yeah, it's a very good point, because what's being lost is nuance. Not everything is just one way. So you can say, okay, here's a solution, but you have to look at the whole picture and all the nuances and speak in truth. But when people are just taking talking points and they hear talking points, they take those on as truth, it may not be the truth. It may be something, there may be something to it, but you have to uncover. You have to watch, be awake. And to your point, there's a great awakening, because I think a lot of people are sensing things aren't matching up. Things aren't passing the smell test.
Yeah.
There's something else going on in the background and in the foreground.
Yeah.
And it's getting very obvious. And so if you start questioning, you are considered crazy or conspiracy theorist. But it reminds me of when I was in school, in grade school, I had the teachers didn't like me. They didn't like me because I was always asking questions. I'm not that academic. So I'd sit in a math class and I would get confused. And then I would ask questions, or I'd sit in an English class and we're talking about philosophy and what was being said by the teacher wasn't making sense to me. So I'd start asking questions, and the authorities didn't like it when I asked, the people in charge didn't like it when I asked too many questions. I'm like, when you're a kid, you don't know that. Luckily, I'd go home and my father would say, trust yourself more than some of these teachers know in general about life. It's like, fantastic. They're giving an opinion, but trust yourself.
Yeah.
Don't buy in. But the Great Awakening that's happening. So there's woke, and then there's really waking up.
Awake.
And there's awake.
Yeah.
Like actually.
Yeah.
Not just buying into a narrative and a groupthink and then making it right and being right. And I'll say this, is that I think what's happening in the world is there's a lot of unfinished resentment that people have at the individual level. The pandemic kind of took the lid off, and people who have a lot of buried resentment don't know what to do with that. So when you don't know what to do with that, you just start externally spewing that.
Yeah.
It starts bleeding out within your own home. It starts bleeding out. If you're a parent, it's bleeding out on your children, your kids. It's bleeding out over your partners, your husbands, your wives. It's bleeding out into society. People get on social media and they just start jumping on the dog piling and tearing people down. But the source of a lot of that, what I see is people have a resentment and they haven't handled it within themselves. And it's dividing them within themselves further, creating their own inner hell.
Oh, it's so true.
And then a collective hell.
Yeah. I'm sure you're familiar with the name Wynton Marsalis. I think he's a famous percussionist. No.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard the name, and I know he's a musician. Yeah.
Here's what he said. There are forces all around you who wish to exploit division, rob you of your freedom, and tell you what to think.
Yeah.
How true is that? Now, the question then goes to this, because we're talking about a news article that we read about how news is dividing people. When is news not news? When is it injected with all kinds of agenda and all kinds of misinformation? Because listen, there are people in the news media that always complain about misinformation or disinformation. But look what happens if you're looking for a direction to go somewhere and somebody gives you one wrong turn to make, you're off your course. And this is why GPS is so great, because GPS tracks your moves and it shows you where you are and what your next turn is going to be. But when the GPS
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was say airplane pilots talk about that. If they're off by 1 degree when they're planning their destination by 1 degree, it will take them thousands of miles off.
It is true.
Their target point.
So when is news not news? When is it just a form of psychosis-inducing hypnosis? Because to me, when I look at the news, I go, that's not news. There's intuitively, there are people that can look at something and go, that's just BS. Sorry. That's just BS. Yeah. And you know it. And this is what your dad said to you, Baron. Trust yourself.
Yeah.
And what did Shakespeare say? To thine own self be true. This is all the truth that we need, really. And then what we do is, as Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. Okay, so let's see what they have to say and then verify whether or not something is actual or whether it's just conflated and strangely twisted and perverted. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, totally. I know for myself, I learn from watching and listening different viewpoints and not just buying into ones. I could listen to the Democrats, the progressives. I could listen to what they have to say. I could look and listen to what the Republicans have to say, but I don't buy it. All of it, hook, line, and sinker. I say, okay, there's some truth in there. There's some truth in there. Oh, that's bullshit. This is BS. This is where they're looking to create a narrative for you to buy into. They're selling their goods.
Yes.
And I've never been a seller. I'm more of a buyer. And I'm not speaking in consuming things, But it's, I even in my work life, in teaching, in my company, I've always been, I'm not going to hard sell you. I'm not going to sell you. I'm more of a buyer. Here's what I'm offering. And if you want to buy in, awesome. If not, it's not for you. And I think, though, taking that into the household, or when we're talking about couples here, married couples that are at odds with each other, are you able to listen without getting reactive, stand in the other person's shoes, and then look at where you're coming from, and are you just talking points? Are you defending something you actually don't even know about? To me, when I watch some of these protesters on the streets, all these, now more recently, these pro-Hamas, Palestine protesters that are marching down the streets in New York City, shutting down businesses, shutting down streets. Most of those people don't even know what they're talking about. They're saying all these things about Israel, and I'm not right here saying Israel's right, Palestine is wrong, Palestinians are wrong, or Palestine is it. But I'm saying, when you look at the individuals who are so strong in their opinion, their rightness, their righteousness, and they don't even know actually what's happening. And I don't even necessarily know what's happening, but I could see that they're fixated on certain talking points they've been given. They're doing the same chants, they're doing the same, spewing the same narratives, but there's no nuance. It's black and white. And was it Hitler that said, if you want to brainwash people, just keep saying something again and again as truth, even if it's a lie, you just keep repeating it as truth until people buy into it. Hitler knew people were weak enough, or if enough people were weak enough, they would buy into it if the propaganda just stayed consistent over time. And he was right. That's how he took over Germany, with Germans, with a lot of probably decent people that it demonstrates how people get caught up into an ideology and they're not thinking for themselves. Did everyone buy into the propaganda? No. And then history demonstrates decades later that, the people who didn't buy into it actually were the ones who had the proper perspective.
Yes. Yeah.
And those people were persecuted.
Yes.
So what's backing up to, again, if you're just dealing with a spouse, a partner, a boyfriend, girlfriend, in your somewhere, if you're locking horns, okay, is it worth your energy? But firstly, seek understanding. And when I say seek understanding, I don't mean doesn't mean you're making them right or their points, validating their points, but it's like, where do you really stand? Are you standing in truth, or are you defending some opinion or viewpoint that's actually not even your own?
So again, I don't mean to drag us toward biblical.
No, it's drag us.
Okay, because I said I don't think that these divisions are necessarily a bad thing. And here is what it says in Luke 12:49. And then it goes on. It says, Jesus causes division. I have come to set the world on fire, and I wish it were already burning. I have a terrible baptism of suffering ahead of me, and I'm now under a heavy burden until it is accomplished.
Jesus said that?
Yes. Do you think that I have come to bring peace to the earth? ? No.
Yeah.
I have come to divide people against each other. From now on, families will be split apart. 3 in favor of me and 2 against, or 2 in favor of me and 3 against. Listen, this is a biblical time, in my opinion. This is a fulfillment of the prophecy of division, which means when these people are fighting, I believe they're fighting over what they intuitively see to be true or untrue. They're fighting with each other over only these 2 things, what is true and what is not true. And I think this is a super important time for us because, first of all, you have to not fall into anger, because anger is an inferior way to fight. When you fight angry, you're fighting dirty. So get out of the anger mode, get out of the ultimately defensive mode of fighting from a force of emotion or a force of your will. You can't force people to see the truth, but at the same time, you can also resist being forced to accept their truth. You can resist it and you can resist it. And by resisting it, by not being changed by other people's force of will or their opinions or their truth or their news, by not being changed, you begin to affect a counter change. By not being changed, you begin to cause a counter change in them, and they begin to question themselves until potentially they can come around to wanting to know the truth. If you don't want to know the truth, there are none so blind as those who do not want to know the truth. But the potential to know the truth is what has to exist between people who disagree.
Yeah, very good. Let's talk about that. So I come back here to the source is you, the individual.
Yeah.
If you've got resentment, you're blinded by resentment. If you're blinded by emotion, you won't know if you're coming from and
Great
seeing
point.
Truth.
Fantastic.
It blurs it.
Yeah.
So you might be standing, I have the truth and I know what's right and you're wrong, and okay. But are you really clear? Have you cleared the fog and the clouds from your own view, from your own eyes? There's that saying that I think it was Jesus about first, before you judge another, get the log out of your own eye.
Yeah. Yes.
What is that one?
I would have to look it up for a specific quotation.
Yeah. But what's the gist of it? Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to remove the splinter, you have a log in your own eye.
If you want to remove the splinter from another's eye,
yes,
first remove the log from your own eye.
Yeah. The big stumbling blocks of how much you actually see about your own self, the truth about your own self. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the kind of work it takes to really get clear in yourself. And look, maybe when you get clear, you'll be affirmed that you were seeing the truth, but you were defending the truth in the wrong way and from the wrong place, from emotion.
Yeah.
But let me just point to this.
Yeah.
I think we all have to unveil what's going on within ourselves, what's actually going on, what's driving you. Because often old resentments are kept alive in your energy, in your being. Old resentments from your childhood. You still resent your father and anyone resembling your father. Like Trump, why do people hate Trump so bad? It's not all people, but some people. And how many of those people, just because he's a strong masculine like figure and he represents something, he triggers something in people that have unfinished resentment toward their father or some authority overimposed, someone who was over their strength, so to speak, was overimposing on them. And they resented that from childhood even. And so now anything or anyone that resembles that resentment is triggered. And then it's throw the baby out with the bathwater and there's no nuance lost. I'm not saying to be pro-Trump here at all. I'm just pointing to when you see the vitriol and the hatred toward someone, anyone, it's wait, stop for a moment, pause. What's going on inside myself that I'm so triggered? And what have I not completed in myself? Because look, at the end of the day, it's not about what's happening in the White House. It's what's happening in your house and how you want to live your life, regardless of circumstances, regardless of what you're dealing with just on the daily life your daily life as a human being. It's what is driving you so that you come back to truth within yourself. You come back to the light within yourself where outside forces don't own you. They don't possess you. but you possess yourself. Through yourself, the way out is through, so to speak, but to go through, in and through, what's driving you to wake up, to start getting aware of, look, if you've got negative energy, that energy, if you've got anger, rage, that energy has to go somewhere. It's either turning in on yourself or it's externally and being pointed out, vented out externally to others and in society. And if you don't handle that within yourself, at the end of the day, you lose yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. You know who Dr. Robert Malone is?
I know that name. He's a doctor, right? mRNA. Super controversial or something during the pandemic, something like that. Yeah. Is that right?
Do I have that right? He invented the technology, the mRNA technology, and he's been warning about the dangers. And you're talking about people doubting themselves. Listen, I have friends in high places who, under pressure, took an untested vax and now regret it. And they did it under pressure. In other words, they said it was the worst decision they had ever made. Because today, because of this, many people are dying suddenly. This is the new trending thing in social media, died suddenly. But here's the interesting thing about that is that those of us who held out and said, look, I don't care if I'm going to have an infectious disease that kills me, okay. Rather than saying I'm going to get something that stops that infectious disease from killing me, but it's been proven that it actually doesn't, I'm one of those people who held out. And it wasn't easy to hold out on my position that I'm not going to. First of all, I never allowed my kids to be vaccinated with childhood immunity things. I've never been a person who agreed with this idea of vaccine works for everybody. And it's a very difficult position to take because there's something inside of you that tells you, don't let it happen to you. If everybody else around you wants to do it, let them do it. It's not up to you to tell them what to do, but they're trying to tell you what to do.
And that's the problem, right? When they start imposing it on you, and I'm someone who's about health and organic health, and not everything is good for everyone. And also I want to see, what can I do naturally? So during the pandemic, when it was being imposed, I'm like, but what I didn't like about it is when people were speaking about certain people out there, whether it's on YouTube or out in podcast land, where you start hearing like people talking about there's alternative health practices, like taking care of your own health. Like there was no emphasis on one's own health and well-being. It's just get a shot, get an injection, take a pill. You don't have to worry about your health, your moving, breathing, what you're eating, your mental health and being, meditate. And it's not that those things are necessarily the answer to all of it, but that nothing was allowed around just general health. Like that wasn't allowed into the mediascape. It wasn't, in fact, it was poo-pooed on. It was put down or censored. And to me, that was a flag. And then I started seeing, to your point, I started seeing certain friends getting the two things I want to say. So I started seeing people I know getting the vaccination, and wasn't it hurting them? Okay, fine. But then I started seeing people were actually getting harmed. I have a couple people I know that really, one dear friend had a stroke, like that within a day or so of getting the vax. And then other people who have more long-term symptoms, and they're still experiencing these reoccurring symptoms from that. Like one friend, the day she got her vaccination, she suddenly started bleeding. She got her period when she wasn't supposed to, and it just kept coming for I think a couple of years. It hasn't stopped. And then it comes out, that's a very common symptom for women. And then things like that. But then people, but here's my point. The second point here is people that I know were having to get the vax to keep their jobs, to not lose their livelihood, it was so imposed on people. And it was untested. but to your point, it's to be able to see for yourself. And then some people just held out, even though it cost them their jobs, it cost them their livelihood, it cost them their careers. But I think to this day, they feel right about that. I'm not vaxxed. I wasn't subject to, I don't work for anybody. I wasn't subject to having to do it and in that way. So I didn't. And I got COVID probably 3 times. And the first time really sucked. Wasn't good, but I came out of it. And then the second, third times, again, I got pretty sick. The last time actually wasn't that bad. Yeah. But it was like just a kind of light flu. But I'm not going to just take something external. I've never lived like that. That's the other side of it. If you've never lived like that, then why do you suddenly have to change just because external authorities are telling you to do it? Again, something wasn't smelling right. Something wasn't matching up. Yeah. And I think a lot of people were like, something doesn't match up here. And some people got it against their will, against their own better judgment because of their circumstances, or just out of fear. Okay, I saw a lot of people just finally give in to getting it, not really understanding it, getting their kids vaxxed, and it went against their own principle. And it wasn't necessary at a certain point.
You know what, though? Yeah. What's so interesting about this conversation, in the direction we're going, is that there was a time where I was challenged by the idea when I had children and to give them these childhood immunity boosters, these vaccines. And something inside of me said, just don't do it. The human beings have existed for thousands, if not millions of years without these things. This is an invention of the last century. If everybody else wants to do it, that's up to them. But for me, it doesn't make sense. And so I had to listen to myself, knowing that, and the idea was, we were told if you don't immunize your children, then they could end up with a terrible, horrible, life-threatening disease. And then I met a child who had the side effects of being immunized as a baby. And this child was not fully functional. The immunizations destroyed the child's mind and his ability to live a functional, normal life. And I thought to myself, okay, this is validation for me. Just one child is all it took for me to meet and to have interaction with. It was the validation for me that said to me, you listened to yourself, and that was good. Yeah. And when you listen to yourself, even if you're making a mistake, maybe that mistake is leading to other things. But the point is, you have to have the courage to follow your own instinct, your own intuition. But if you're
including if you want to get the vax, and you follow that, awesome.
Exactly.
If you don't,
but if it's not your intuition, and if you've adopted a pressure source outside of you,
that's it. That's not what we're talking about here. Yeah.
So I didn't do it.
And it's back to it became political. Yes. So then again, coming back full circle to this article of dividing people, because a lot of homes were divided. Maybe one of the parents of kids was for the vax, the other was not. That created a lot. I know people who got divorced over it.
Oh, yeah.
And it's interesting because when something is being imposed on you and then you want it imposed over other loved ones and it goes against the grain, how do you handle that? Where do you stand? Do you just cave? Yeah. Do you just give in? Yep. And maybe, but if you sense that where the authorities or outer external environment experts are imposing something and it doesn't smell right, why are you doubting yourself? Why are you, and this goes across the board, the spectrum of anything, what we're talking about, where the world is being divided politically, where the world is being divided amongst people in different viewpoints and ideologies around how things should be and shouldn't be. If you are caught up in that web of emotion and you bring emotion into it because you haven't handled the emotion, resentment within yourself, you lose yourself and you'll go along with the strongest pressure, the strongest authority. But then you it undercuts your own confidence in life.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Fear and anger are cousins, kissing cousins.
Yeah, two horns on the same head. Yeah.
Because fear and anger, one creates the other always, is a spiral. And I wanted to mention something about Robert Malone, Dr. Robert Malone. I just came across this article that he wrote yesterday. It's titled Purity Spirals Incoming. Now you ask yourself, what is a purity spiral? And here's what he says. Since the fall of 2022, I've been struggling to describe a behavioral group dynamic that I keep observing, which is operating within self-identified medical freedom movement, and have used this historic term Jacobean, referring to one particularly brutal phase of the French Revolution, to define a process which commonly tears apart almost all resistance movements. The natural process is actively exploited by opponents by using methods such as bad jacketing, accusations of controlled opposition, and the like, to sow in mistrust and accelerate fragmentation. And here's how he describes and what a purity cycle is. Listen to this. What the heck is a purity cycle? This is from the Urban Dictionary. A social ratchet effect within a community, a process of moral outbidding. Now listen, think about the virtue signaling, and now we've gotten to this point where there's moral outbidding. Unchecked, which corrodes the group from within, rewarding those who put themselves at the extremes and punishing nuance relentlessly. So there's a point at which you can't even say a word about a thing at this point in our society. This is where we're talking about how news is dividing people. It goes on to say a purity cycle can contain all of these things, but it is defined by the fact that it takes place in a defined community or society where being purer than thou is always being rewarded, and holding a divergent, less pure opinion is normally punished, a dynamic which leads to an inevitable escalation as only the most extreme can win. Now, after Luis denounced Nike as bourgeois, the village fell into purity cycle where first Nikes, then all sneakers, then all shoes, and later socks were burned on a pyre by the villagers. Foot amputations followed in the spring. He's referring to the radical thing that happened in the French Revolution.
They were wearing Nikes in the French Revolution?
No, he's actually bringing it forward to this present day where if you're denounced, then suddenly everything about you is thrown on a fire, including your feet.
Yeah, if you're denounced. Yeah.
See, and this is what's been happening.
And let's put it into modern language is cancel culture.
Yeah, it is cancel culture.
Virtue signaling,
absolutely.
Cancel culture. You get denounced. Social media now allows for that. And it ties back to the oldest game in the book, which is divide and conquer. How do you take over a people? How do you take over a country? How do you take over more than one? You divide and then you conquer. I used to, in running teams of people, I always would see it only takes one person in there in a group to undermine,
yes,
to be the saboteur.
Yes.
It takes one person
candidate.
And they'll, in the background, on the foreground, they're the cheerleader, they're positive, they're great. Yep. That's the front, the mask they show and wear. But in the background, they're undermining, they're whispering to others, and then they can create a conspiracy of mediocrity in a group. But what's happening, they're dividing and then they're conquering. But the thing is that runs deep in humanity.
Yes,
again, this isn't just a current thing. You could look at more recent revolutions, whether it was like Hitler, Nazi Germany, or you look at Mao, communist China, or those revolutions, but going far back, the Roman Empire, the Greek empires, how did they fall? Eventually, it's always from the inside, and it's dividing people and conquering. And now we have social media, we have the media, we have governments, we have the wrong leaders, the wrong people in the right places where they have power and control. And they're imposing narratives that they know divide. The whole intent there is to divide. Yeah. And if you look at Democrats, you look at Republicans, they all have their talking points. They're divided and their heels are dug in. But the end of the day, it comes back to the individual. You've got to wake up and you've got to stand in your own center. You have to create a place to stand within yourself that you don't lose yourself just in the strongest outer pressure.
So I want to address one thing because I think we've reached the pinnacle here.
Yeah.
You said something about it's not what happens in the White House, but it's what happens in your house. But I got to tell you that what happens in your house translates to the White House. So it's not a trickle down, it's a trickle up.
Yeah.
And so when you understand the value of the division on the basis of a moral divide, when you see that you are the person who determines what happens as the trickle up happens, because the trickle up right now has been a very bad thing.
Starting in your own house.
If you start at home.
Starting in your own body.
It starts with your own body. Exactly. Yeah. It is a micro thing that becomes a macro thing. And we're at that dividing point right now, a historical dividing point again. After you read that article, it's clear that a lot of people are waking up, and the waking up is the hardest thing to do. But once you're awake, then the forces that are aligned against you want to put you back to sleep. And it's like the movie The Matrix. They want to keep you in a contained system where you don't actually do any of your own thinking. But when you start to do your own thinking, that's when you begin to threaten everybody. Joe Rogan, having Robert Malone on his show, he almost got his show canceled because of that, because they were talking about mass formation psychosis. There has been a mass formation of psychotic people running this country, but the awakening is now. People are waking up, and just keep awakening. Don't let them put you back in the box. That's what I want to say. That's my final word right there.
Yeah. I think the solution is personal excellence, personal best, becoming the best version of yourself, becoming productive, living your best life, a conscious life, living in possibility rather than cynicism and resignation, and then digging your heels in and defending something that you're not even happy in yourself. Like, you're not even complete in yourself. It's live your best life, become a principled person, live true, and from morning to night, and get quiet, get still, get quiet, meditate, pray, visualize, and execute. Action. Faith without action, faith without works is dead. Yeah. You need to action what you know to do is true, and awaken within yourself, because that is the antidote to all this division within your own home and within your own community and society, and ultimately it trickles up to the powers that be. Yeah.
Great points.
All right, you all, thank you. If you've gotten this far, thank you. And stay true, keep disrupting and rising above the drift without resentment. Challenge the norm, create a new narrative for your life. This is your boy Baron here, signing off until next time. Stay true, stay bold, stay blessed, and peace be with you, my friends.